Good morning, Amiee. How are you doing this morning?
I am good. Certainly sick of wearing sweaters. How are you, Alexis?
I'm good. I can understand that being in the Midwest where it's still a bit chilly for spring. But I'm excited to dive into our podcast today. We're going to be talking about the planets. So yeah, a lot to cover here, but it's a big one. I think, if anyone who has listened to our podcast knows that we talk about the planets a lot and we like to give them personality. We like to personify them. So we're going to go through each of the planets today. And yeah, I'm excited for it.
Absolutely. We do like to personify them because they have personality. And as with any relationship, once you get to know the personality of the person you're in relationship with, the relationship can flow with more ease. It can create more growth opportunities, and it can bring more magic. So this is a little just kind of crash course in how we experience the personalities of each of these different astral bodies. And we're going to be starting, of course, in the center with the sun.
Yes. So, and just one more point on, as we're talking about, these are all archetypal energies. So these are energies that we all have within us, but there are, just like we did the podcast on the zodiac, there's certain areas where you'll feel more drawn to. Now, the piece with the planets is that the planets each hold a part of your archetypal self within a different sign. So you can look at your natal chart and see where this piece that we're talking about today, where it falls in the zodiac. And so the planets are kind of, and we'll go more into them, they're kind of these pieces of our persona. And then the zodiac is the quality or the kind of theme that they can, that can be brought up. So it's really helpful to, as you're listening, if you want to go back and listen to the Astrology 101 on the zodiac, and you can kind of place these planets within those signs of the zodiac. So as we go through, it'll make more sense. But knowing that we have that Astrology 101 zodiac podcast, part 1 and 2, that
episode 32 and 33. Just to point folks in the right direction.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, so as Amiee mentioned, we'll start with the sun. And the sun, obviously, the other piece, when we're talking about astrology, everything is from Earth's point of view. So obviously, we are orbiting around the sun. We know that. But in the world of astrology, everything is from Earth's point of view. So it's as if we were on Earth looking up at the sky and everything that's happening around us. So in astrology, Earth is the center, but we know, right, that things are orbiting around the sun. And that's why certain planets look like they're going retrograde. They're really not. Nothing moves backwards, but it's just because it's from Earth's perspective. Now, if you were to go to another planet like Mars, none of this would make sense. Right? Because it would be from a totally different perspective. So this is all from Earth's perspective. And so just, something to keep in mind as we talk about the cycles and as we talk about the different pieces. But starting with the sun. Yes. So the sun takes 365 days to make a full rotation around the zodiac. Hence, our birthday and our solar return happens when that natal place in your chart where the sun is when you were born. 365 days later, you'll have a solar return around your birthday. And the sun spends about a month per sign. And that's why this is the one that most people know. Most people know when they hear, about the zodiac or horoscopes, they say, oh, yeah, that's the one that I know because that's where the sun was for about a month when you were born. And yeah, the sun is kind of that core expression of our personality, that radiance that we share with the world. And you can feel into the sun, it has that illuminating quality, where by transit, when things are happening, so for instance, when the sun is in, Taurus, you're in Taurus season, that is illuminating that theme for the month. So the sun brings illumination and yeah, kind of this radiant quality to whatever it touches.
Love it. I actually brought us a piece of poetry to go with the sun today.
Awesome.
So this is Drew Dellinger's piece called The Sun. The sun, incandescent sphere, permanent explosion, its core pouring itself out for us, source, to a hamlet of planets, asteroids, and comets. Human trajectory unfolds in this orbit between wandering stars and the invincible sun. Imagine when the heart of the sun goes supernova, instantly swallowing the distance between us, the wet earth. A single tear will finally merge with your fiery body. I've felt your heart beat since the universe was plasma, ancient, always new, perpetual dawning. Horizon of light and arcing shadow, string of days and nights, primeval rhythm. The sky and the earth are lovers who've been forced apart. Earth yearns for the sky, clouds long to kiss the ocean. Mountains rise up with desire. Himalaya, Appalachia, Sierra, Shasta, Fuji, Kenya, Denali. The cosmos, a journey. The universe, longing. Each human, a body of water. Sunlight enters a drop of water and disperses into colors. Sunlight enters planet Earth and species blossom. Sacred secret. Granite, sequoia, redwood, oak. Salamander, condor beetle. Radiant sun, Earth your disciple. Apostle with strange powers to manifest the mystery. The changing moon, a triple goddess. Silver bow of Artemis becomes full moon, becomes the goddess of the dark moon. Wandering among souls of the dead, announced by howling dogs. She dwells on tombs and lonely places where two roads cross. Every prophet must make peace with death, a sacred secret. Imagine when your heart goes supernova, blazing matter extending across 93 million miles. The wet earth, a single tear, will finally merge with your fiery body. Golden light in cobalt sky, illumination of spaciousness, blue like Krishna's blue body, blue like the cosmos. The sun, for me, lives in our solar plexus. It is this radiant thing that shines outward and brings life. It provides this willpower and this force and this go. And for me, it lives in my solar plexus because it shines over the field of my creativity, which lives in my pelvis, of course. We have talked about sexual energy being creativity before, and the sun feeds that. The sun feeds everything. That's why I brought in that poem. Is without this force of light, what do we have here? We have nothing here. And the sun has all kinds of nifty, astronomical, we go into the astronomy of it, like sunspots and how they flare and they visit us energetically. So we see power surges or power failures. There was a dead spot that resurrected, a dead sunspot that resurrected. So its energy actually landed on Earth on Easter. Do I need to say you can't make it up? And so the sun is this wonderful, mysterious thing. And it is almost, I want to say the life of the party, but I may change my mind once we get to Jupiter or Venus.
Yeah. Well, it is that life force. It's like that life-giving energy. It's almost like, yeah, like this huge spotlight. Like without it, you wouldn't be able to see anything. Nothing would really live. Nothing would be. And I don't know if you heard when, while you were reading the poem, my cat Joey just like ran through. He was playing with his little, ball that hangs from his cat tree. And it was just this like life, right? This like opening of invigorating life. And to me, yeah, that's totally what the sun is. And I think also when we feel into it in our natal charts, it brings it's not just personality, because sometimes you'll hear people say like, oh, the sun is your personality. I feel like that doesn't really cover it. It's really when you are in your full radiance and you are in your full expression, because oftentimes, we can relate to different parts of our sun sign, sometimes the shadow side of it. But when you are in your full radiance of it, you are in your full expression of who you really are. And I think your sun sign just helps you bring that out. Again, we are all of the archetypes in the zodiac, we are all the planets, but that sun helps to bring out that full expression of you. So yeah, in our kind of personification, I feel like it's like the sun or like the disco ball or like the light that is the party. Like without it, you wouldn't have the party.
Yeah, there'd be nothing to shine on everything. So I think radiance is an amazing word to move with the sun, is the radiance. Because as we will learn when we get to the moon, the moon's phases are kind of based on its relationship with the sun and how that plays. And it's one of the simplest things I bring up when people say, oh, astrology, they poo-poo astrology. Like, question one, do you feel different when the sun is up than when the moon is up? Because that's astrology. It is providing meaning to go with the movement. So we have astronomy, which studies the movement, and we have astrology, which studies the meaning of the movement. And I know I certainly feel different. It's much easier for me to get up in the mornings in the summer when the sun shows up much, much earlier. I can feel the sun before it breaks the horizon. In the winter, I just want to hibernate because the sun isn't up yet. And I'm a rising Leo, so my chart is ruled by the sun. So and I believe we went through this when we did the zodiac, is we spoke into which planet rules which sign. And so when we work with these energies, we can start to plug into them in a way that allows us to feel them more acutely. And we can then harness that energy. I am much more spry and chipper in more daylight hours. Yeah. And I'm a total morning person. The sun comes up and I'm like, let's go.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that brings us perfectly into the moon, because the moon is opposite of the sun, right? The moon shines at night when it's a quieter time, when it's a time to go within. It represents in our natal chart that inner emotional self. I like to say that the moon natally it represents what nourishes you. So again, you can look at what sign the moon falls in, and those are qualities and things that nourish you. So it has that internal feel. Also, it's the fastest moving planetary body. It's a moon, so it's not a planet, but right, we're considering it in these things that represent planets. Its cycle is 28 days. So it moves through the zodiac very fast, 28 days, right? Spends about 2.5 days per sign. So it kind of flavors the days with this quality, this kind of underlying quality. And it's interesting, if you follow the moon and where it is, it's one of those things that we don't talk about a lot because it moves so fast. It's like, you're not always following it, but I'll find there's sometimes when I'm like, oh, I'm in a certain mood, or I'm like, where is the moon, out of curiosity? And I go and I find where the moon is, and different signs will bring a different quality to the moon, but it's kind of like this underlying, kind of, I guess mood is a good word for it. Like that can kind of flavor the emotions collectively. So again, that one moves really fast. The moon, as far as the zodiac, spends 2.5 days per sign, 28 days for a full cycle, which when you feel into the lunar cycle itself, right? 28 days. Yeah.
I was thinking, going off of the idea that the moon is nourishment. Like if we're going to use radiance for the sun, nourishment for the moon. When a moon lands in a sign, it's like shifting the spices or the flavors that go with it. You know, as the mom of a small child, like to bring this really into the practical. When, okay, here is chicken. Here is chicken with chilies and chicken with lemon and chicken with basil. And you have all of these different options. We have 12 ways we can flavor the moon. And, working with this, the moon as nourishment, as it moves through the sign, the moon gets a different flavor about what the nourishment is and how we access that nourishment. I am a Cancer moon. I am an emotional creature. My nourishment comes through being able to feel and express. Our Alexis is a Sagittarius moon. Just a cat knocking shit down.
Travel. That's what nourishes me. Movement, travel.
Movement and travel nourishes Alexis. Yeah. And Leo really wanted us to know that. So those are different flavors of nourishment. For the Cancer moon, it's connection and expression and the flow of emotions. For the Sagittarius moon, she wants to travel and be out having hands-on, body-on experiences in the world. So these are just different styles of nourishment. And our moon, having grown up reading horoscopes and being like, hit or miss, horoscopes are based on our sun signs. As you move deeper into astrology, you learn your moon and it is really important and helpful to have your birth time. Because as Alexis said, the moon moves every 2.5 days. And on those days that the moon moves, she doesn't move like at 2:00 Central Time every 2.5 days.
No, and this happened to me. So I had estimated I rounded down by 8 minutes, just to make it an even number. And the moon was in a completely different sign. So for me, my moon is right on the cusp, and 8 minutes before it was in a different sign. So I've had a birth chart reading actually and I gave her the right time, but she read it as a Scorpio moon, because I have a Sagittarius moon that's right on the line. And 8 minutes before it was in Scorpio. And it's a different flavoring, different, energy. So yeah, very important to know your birth time. So I just wanted to bring that in, because it's literally like minutes can make the difference depending on where the moon is for you, and even the degree. So when you're looking at your chart, because the degree that it's at can tell you what it's next to, what it's aspecting. So really important to have the time to find your moon.
And take the time to find your moon. There are a multitude of ways. If you don't if you know what hospital were born at, you can check county records. I know I've had clients really have to dig down and make a lot of calls and jump through a lot of hoops, and it gets you a much, much more accurate reading, because then the flavor of what nourishes your inner world. So the sun shines out and the moon is an inward energy.
Yeah. And I love when people discover their moon and also their rising sign, which we'll get to that when we talk about the aspects and our next 101. But the sun and the moon, I love when people find their moon, because it's like, oh, there's this other quality, right? It's like, how can, when people learn about, their sun sign, how can everyone in the same month have the same, right, personality? Well, it's flavored by all these different planets, all these different things, your moon, your rising sign. So I love when people discover their moon, because we feel very connected to our moon, because it's our internal space. So when you find out what your moon is, you're like, oh yeah, that feels good. That makes sense, right? And so in our, as we're building these qualities, if the sun is the lighting or the, that radiance of the party, the moon, I feel like, is the music. It sets the mood, right? Like it's setting this mood, and it's this very like underlying quality, but it's so important, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you don't have the music, that's going to be a very different party, right? It's kind of like this unseen, like just mood setting energy that I feel like if we're, building this this party vibe of our planets, I feel like the moon would be music, right?
Oh yeah, the moon would totally be music, because the music you play at a party and how it nourishes the guests completely dictates the mood of the party.
Yeah.
And how people are going to interact and communicate and think, which is maybe we're moving right into Mercury here.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and if the sun and the moon are these kind of qualities that are steady, right? Like the lighting and the music is always there. Whereas as we get into the other planets, they can come and go, right? Which I think is part of when we're feeling into the zodiac makes sense. Like we always see the sun and the moon, right? I mean, as far as the sky is clear and all of that, but we can always see the sun and the moon. But the other planets, they hide for a bit. Some are really far away, right? Like we can't always see them. And so, yeah, I think that brings us perfectly into Mercury, who is the fastest moving planet that starts to take on a personality that we'll start to build here. But he has a cycle of 88 days, which means he goes retrograde because he begins his cycle, all the planets now, as we start talking about them, especially the personal planets, they begin their cycle in a retrograde phase. So we have about 3 Mercury retrogrades per year. And we did a whole podcast episode on Mercury retrograde, and we went into the whole Mercury cycle. So we won't go into it here, but that was episode 20. So you can go and listen to that.
You're so on top of things.
Yeah, well, that's the one I have because I knew ahead of time that we would talk about him. And we did a whole podcast on him. But again, his cycle is 88 days. He goes retrograde 3 times a year. So we have Mercury retrograde pretty frequently, right? Like we have it enough where, we've kind of all at least heard about Mercury retrograde. But yeah, that podcast, we go into more detail and go through the whole cycle, which is really fascinating. And so depending on where he's at, he can either zip through a sign in as fast as 15 days, or when he's in his retrograde and kind of slowing down, moving back and forth, he can spend up to 2 months in a sign. So he's very fast mover, but also he goes retrograde a couple of times a year. So he shifts and changes, which is very much Mercury. He's a shapeshifter. He's a translator. He, in your natal chart, will represent the way you think and communicate. So he travels close to the sun. So often Mercury will be in the same sign as your sun sign. That's pretty common. But sometimes he will sneak by or stay behind a little bit. And so he may be in one of the signs next to your sun sign. So that's a really interesting piece for those that find this out, that Mercury is in a different sign than their sun sign. It makes sense because it adds another quality, right? It adds this, yeah, I relate to my sun sign. There's this radiance and this kind of core personality I feel, but I think like this other sign, right? So finding out where your Mercury is can be really helpful. And again, sometimes it's in the same sign as your sun, often, sometimes it's not. And you can also look to see if Mercury is retrograde, because he goes retrograde a few times a year. You may have been born during Mercury retrograde. So yeah, I would say Mercury in the party. He also, like, if we were to modernize him, he rules technology. So I feel like he's very tech savvy. He's very social. And he's kind of that social butterfly, like moving through. He can speak many languages, so he talks to everybody. And to me, he's that kind of social butterfly of the party. He's very fun. He's very, like, he can kind of talk to anybody and shift. And, say he's talking to Venus about beauty, which we'll get to. He can move into that space and like, yeah, Venus, yeah. And then he can talk to Saturn, the professor, who we'll get to later, and like put on this like, different persona. That's Mercury. He shape shifts and moves because in mythology, he is Mercury or Hermes, depending on the Greek or Roman pantheon. And he is a translator. He can traverse all the realms. And so he has that ability to shift and move quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that and keeping in mind that sometimes the shapeshifter or social butterfly is an annoyance. So Mercury has this trickster energy to him as well. And it's, are you paying attention to what you're hearing, to what you're saying, to what you're listening to? Because he has this trickster energy. He's also associated with the Norse god Loki, or the Egyptian god Thoth, who was, there is a level of wisdom to this child mind, to being able to be playful and open and not really hold anything, because you don't get real restricted. And to keep in mind that Mercury can come off as the guy that you don't want to talk to at the party. Because maybe the music is one way and Mercury is in his energy where he wants to be tricksy and playful, and your moon just is not up for it. Your moon is not feeling tricksy and playful. So social butterflies are wonderful. And I feel Mercury more as the shapeshifter energy of, he can talk to Venus about beauty and then go over and get all academic with Saturn, before he heads over to talk to Uranus about, what kind of rebellion they're going to lead. And that can also lead to this energy of, well, who actually is this person? Which is that shapeshifter energy? Is if somebody is consistently shape-shifting, well, who are they? How do they think? And we'll get more into that with the aspects and the houses to help kind of nail that down.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, Mercury always has a lot of energy, it feels. And of course, there's a slowing down when he's retrograde. But, when he's moving forward, when he's in that fast moving pace, he has a lot of energy. And so, I think that's why sometimes he can be known as that trickster. When it's Mercury retrograde, you'll often hear there's mishaps with travel, there's mishaps with technology. But I really think all of that is just to get us to pay attention, just to get us to maybe even slow down. Maybe we're moving too fast. Because Mercury has the energy of, Hermes, Mercury, that it's just an energy, like he can move fast. He's good. He's not in a human body. Mm-hmm. So I feel like often the message for us is, to slow down during his retrograde periods, to actually stop and what are we actually thinking about? What are we actually, what is on our mind? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I feel like Mercury definitely has a lot of energy. But again, he goes retrograde. So there's times where he slows down and brings a different energy. But in the party, kind of theme, he's definitely kind of the life of the party energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he is busy talking to everybody. He is busy making sure that the people who need to connect can connect. Oh, Saturn has this idea and I need to get him hooked up over here with Venus because she's got a plan that can add to this. And he moves through the party creating connections. Because he can speak everyone's language, he can also see how it all plugs in to some extent.
Right. Yeah. And I also feel like because he has a tie to technology, he's the one where if something goes wrong, where like, oh, there's a problem with the music or there's a problem with the lighting, Mercury can come in and like fix it. And he also, I feel like he'd be the one to like start a game or like, right, like get things kind of started in that way. So yeah, love Mercury.
We love us some Mercury.
Which brings us to Venus.
It does bring us to Venus.
Yeah, so Venus, I love Venus. She in the party, well, because we're still in that party kind of piece. She's wearing like a beautiful silk dress. She is like, she wants to bring really great food and wine. So she's going to like say, oh, I have a caterer. Let me set you up with a caterer. We're going to have really delicious food and wine. And she probably has something to say about the music too and setting the mood. She definitely has to do with aesthetic and that kind of thing. So bringing us to the planet Venus, her cycle is 18 to 19 months. And it follows the myth of Inanna, which we talk a lot about in our Patreon. And we've done a whole podcast on the cycle of Venus as well, because it's a fascinating one. It's probably one of my favorite planetary cycles. But she, again, because of her retrogrades, can spend about anywhere from 23 days to 2 months in a sign. So again, she only goes retrograde that once every 18 to 19 months. And just because of the way she travels, she can spend, generally it's about a month in a sign. But again, she can move a little bit quicker or slower depending on what's going on and where she is. And she's about attraction. So in your chart, when you look at where Venus is natally, she's about what you're attracted to, what you need or want in a relationship. Also, she's about like bringing things together and harmonizing, right? So she has this quality of bringing things together, of attraction, of magnetism. And she also rules money and all things luxury, sensuality, food. Talked about the home aesthetics, so that kind of vibe. These are all very Venus qualities, which she rules. One of the signs she rules is Taurus, which again has those qualities of the sensuality and the good food and all of that. And the other sign she rules is Libra, which has to do with relationships. So she's definitely a big sign about relationships. And yeah, I feel like her in the party vibe, she's definitely like, people come to her, right? She's about attraction. She's not the Mercury like zipping around. She is very just like relaxed and happy in her own place. And people want to come to talk to her, beautiful. But she's also very happy sipping her champagne and like having her food, and she is good. And she just attracts to her what she wants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that magnetism is a beautiful word for Venus, because that is very, very much how she feels. And to keep in mind that to be magnetic, we also have to be willing to receive. We can call in and attract, law of attraction, the hell out of everything. And if we don't have the ability to receive it and allow it to land, which is, yes, she is at the party, and she is not only attracting those who want to come and interact with her, she's willing to receive them. So it's both pieces of it, because we all know people who call in all kinds of amazing things, and then they shut it down out of fear and an inability to receive. So Venus is also tied to our self-worth and our self-esteem. Am I worthy of that raise? Am I worthy of that house, that relationship, that car, on the very 3D plane? Am I worthy of myself and the meat suit I inhabit, and getting to do this fun thing that is life with all of its pieces. So she is magnetism. And of course we can magnetize and have all the stuff zip towards us. And this image of her sitting back at the party and kind of essentially holding court, she is, until we add in the planetoids and the asteroids, she and the moon are our feminine representatives. And Venus is this queen who is going to sit back and receive what she is attracting in. She's beautiful energy. And there is a harmoniousness when you're working with your Venus energy, to be able to recognize that the more we receive, the more we have to give. It is this beautiful cycle of harmony that just kind of rolls along when we can call on our Venus and sit back. Like really being in that feminine energy of sitting back.
Yeah, and that piece that you brought up around the self-worth, because she definitely rules abundance and finance and money, but it's, yeah, like you said, it's reflected through our self-worth and what we're able to open to and receive. And that'll often be a big theme that comes up around Venus retrograde, right? Because it's that going within. Self-worth is a big one to come up around that time. And of course, it can come up at any time, but that seems to be a big theme that comes up around Venus retrograde. Yeah, love Venus.
And I don't know anybody on the planet that cannot continue to work on their self-worth and self-esteem, because all of us are here having this human experience. And so Venus is a beautiful energy to work with in honing and getting to know, like, where am I really at? Where could I use some shoring up? Where could I push my edges a little bit? And so Venus would be the energy you call on for that.
Yeah, and in relationship, because the more that we can refine our own self-worth and you know, and it can be a relationship to anything. It can be a relationship to things in our life and people, right? So mainly people is what I'm thinking of, but that is reflected through our ability to connect to this energy of self-worth and of the ability to receive. Because I think, you know, often people will have an idea of what they want, but it's like, well, why don't I have that? The only reason you don't have that is there's something that is blocking you from fully receiving it. And it's not to say that it's a bad thing. It's not to say, it's just part of our journey of learning to open to receive. And so, yeah, Venus definitely brings this feminine quality, this openness. And I just love that image of her just sitting back at the party and just calling to her. The other thing that comes up, I think of the Empress card in tarot, which if you are familiar with tarot, it's a card where she's just sitting back, very much connected to the earth and just to this beauty. And she is just enjoying life. Depending on the tarot card, sometimes there's, you know, food and different things. So yeah, that's very much the image that came, was Venus at the party, just sitting back, relaxing and enjoying wherever she's at. Like, she's happy if people are coming to talk to her and interacting. She's happy to just be there by herself, like enjoying food, enjoying the music, dancing. She's truly comfortable in her skin to enjoy whatever is happening around her, because she's magnetizing what she truly wants.
And able to receive it. And when she's able to receive it, she's like, yeah, I'm good. I got my champagne and I'm at a party, and the sun is creating the lighting and the moon has got the music going and you know, providing the nourishment of sound. Mercury's working the crowd, and Venus is just sitting back and drawing to her what she is willing and able to receive.
Which brings us to Venus's consort, Mars. So in the sky, we're covering the personal planets. So up through Mars, this is the last personal planet that we'll cover. The sun and the moon we'll put them in that, you know, bucket of personal planets. And then we have Mercury, Venus, and Mars. So they're the closest planets to us, to Earth, right? And so we bring in, if Venus is the feminine, Mars brings the masculine. Mars is about forward motion, about taking action. And so they're kind of paired up in that way, that they are those personal planets that represent the feminine, the masculine. So a Mars cycle is about 2 years, and he can spend about 2 months in a sign. When he's retrograde, though, he can spend up to 7 months in a sign. So, right? You can feel into when he goes retrograde every 2 years, which we're actually having that happen towards the end of 2022. He only goes retrograde every 2 years, but when he does, he can spend a longer time in a sign. So yeah, he's very much about, when you look at where he is natally for you in your chart, what drives you, and also how you express your desires. I always link Mars very much to desire, and the ability to like outwardly express and take action on those desires. Yeah, and he's very much about action. Like when you think about Mars in mythology, he is associated with this warrior energy. So it's definitely that outward energy. And Mars at the party, do you have a feel of Mars at the party, what he's up to?
I hadn't gotten there yet. I was feeling into, so Mars is about action, and in his oldest forms, before he kind of got narrowed down to just being a warrior, he was still about action, but he was an agrarian god. So for me, there is this the desire that is held within the seed to grow and expand, and that action. So there is this action towards growth, right? Because when we have this desire for action, it oftentimes requires us to grow, especially if we're taking action that we're unfamiliar with. And Mars was a lover. He was an agrarian god and a lover. He and his consort Venus would get together, like we just passed Beltane, and they were part of that energy that sent couples into the fields to fertilize and bring that sexual, creative, desire, agrarian, let's grow things energy. Mars the party, for me, he feels a little stiff, because there is this edge of having to be alert and knowing what's going on. He's the guy that stands with his back to the wall, knows where all of the doors and the windows are, and is there working on like, where do I take action? He is also, this lover aspect of him is tracking where his consort is. And so that's Mars for me, is this
that kind of like bodyguard energy, like
like
eyes on everything. Yeah.
Eyes on everything, watching out for things.
And also Mars in the chart, when you follow Mars by transit, it's pretty fascinating. He activates whatever he touches. So he brings this real ignition and this activation. And it's really fascinating. We'll talk about Mars when we do our podcast. And so when you can feel into what he activates, what he kind of ignites by transit when he's moving through, I also feel like when he's feeling like everything's in check, everyone's in place, like the place is locked down, I feel like he also has this side of him that is kind of like party vibe, like, like also just like I picture him like playing some like sport, or like if there's a pool, he's like getting like a game of like Marco Polo, or, like, I don't know, just like he's just like in that energy too. So I can see him like kind of moving between this bodyguard, like making sure that like we're all safe, like everyone's in check, like, there's nothing to worry about, eyes on all the doors. And also like when he can relax a little bit, he's this activating energy that I feel like him and Mercury as a team, like creating like a game, like the two of them, it's like
totally
very high energy.
Yes.
That I don't know if anyone else is really ready for, but if they're game, I think it can be really fun. They bring this like ignition and this activation, for sure.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. Once Mars moves out of his watchful warrior place, there is a playfulness to him of bringing that spark. Like, let's get everybody in the pool and play Marco Polo. Let's like get a really rousing, rowdy game of badminton going, as and as Venus is in the shade under an umbrella with fresh fruit and plenty of mimosas. Mars and Mercury are out there like rounding up the teams to get going.
Yeah.
So yes, there's an ignition to Mars.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. Any last pieces on Mars before we move?
No, I feel like we're doing good.
Yeah. So next we have Jupiter. So we start to move out of the personal planets and we move into the transpersonal. So Jupiter is the first. Now they start to move because these, as we get further away, they start to move slower, right? So Jupiter takes 12 years now to make a full cycle around the zodiac. He spends about 1 year per sign. Each year he spends about a year, right? That made sense. He spends a year in each sign.
It totally made sense. I am absolutely following. I hope everyone else is too.
And I really enjoy that kind of breakdown because he brings expansion wherever he is. So he spends about a year expanding an area of your chart for you, expanding an area for us collectively. He's really definitely also about our relationship to abundance and this kind of like infinite unfolding that life can be. So when you feel into that 12-year cycle that it takes Jupiter to make a full cycle around, we have every 12 years a Jupiter return. So when you look at where Jupiter was in your chart when you were born, it takes about 12 years for him to come around. So every 12 years at the age of 12, 24, 36, 48, etc., right? We have a Jupiter return. And it's a time of abundance. It's one of the really more beautiful returns that we have, because a lot of them, as we get into them, they can be challenging. But it's actually, although it's on an auspicious transit and it's about abundance and what we can kind of receive, that's a key, is are we able to receive, and where are we in our relationship to abundance? Because I found for a lot of people, when they're going through their Jupiter returns, it can be actually a really challenging time because it pushes the edges of what you're comfortable with, of what you are really able to receive. So I've seen it go where it brings really beautiful things into people's lives, and it can also bring kind of this overwhelming these challenges that will really poke at where you're not, because Jupiter's like, come on, like there's so much more, like, right? Like this is a time to experience all that is possible. And so I found that as well with Jupiter returns, that it can be really challenging because it kind of pushes the edges of what we believe is possible.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to talk astronomy for just a minute, and we'll get into this. So we've got Mars, who is a 24 to 26 and a half month cycle around the sun. And then we've got this great big gap before we get to Jupiter, who's 12 years. So what's in this gap? There's an asteroid belt there, and we will likely get into the asteroids because we like playing with the asteroids. It's where a lot of our feminine energies have been brought into astronomy. And this gap, this space, the enormity of the space between Mars and Jupiter, it really, to me, speaks a little bit about, like, he's like, I got to go over here because I need more space. I need more stuff. And even with that, he is held in check to some extent by Saturn, which makes his ability to expand a much more grounded 3D boots on the ground experience than, say, Neptune. And we will get to all of these and we will talk to them. It's just, for me, Jupiter has, because he's bound by Saturn, he has this ability to really bring the abundance, to bring the expansion into our physical lives in a way that, say, Neptune, who's on the other side of Saturn, and he's got no rules, doesn't necessarily have that. Like, and now let's bring it in. And how does it fit in your life? Where are you willing to expand so it can fit So Jupiter to me also has this very real feel to him when he expands. Like, you know, I have watched Jupiter expand my world in really practical, lifetime ways when he has moved through areas of my chart, being like, hey, and now we're going to make this bigger, and now we're going to make this bigger. And there are some people, my son is in his Jupiter return, he's only 11. So, you know, 12 is a good estimate to go with. And sometimes it happens a year early. And to pay attention to where it is happening, what's being expanded. And yeah, Jupiter is expansion. He's bring me more beer, bring me more wine. Let's play another game. Let's have another conversation. And he is associated with Venus, as they're both benefics. They both are planets that traditional astrology has seen as beneficial, bringing us good things. And as we spoke about with Venus, our ability to actually receive those good things differentiates whether or not they land.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just to touch on that Jupiter return piece is whatever challenges are coming up are probably a good marker as to where you're being asked to expand into, right? And where you're being asked to trust the expansion. So that can be kind of a good reminder to check of like knowing when you're going through Jupiter returns, because the challenges that come up when you know that that's what you're in, then you can kind of lean into the expansion and it helps the process. I found people who understand that they're going through their Jupiter return can be helpful. Yeah, and Jupiter at the party, he's definitely about the more. Like he's like, oh, let's bring an ice luge in. Let's like, right, like why? Right, but because he wants to, and because it's like gonna bring a whole different vibe. He's like, I'm gonna bring in some more music, like we're gonna just switch it up. There's more, like there's so much more that we can listen to. And I think he would team up with Venus as far as like, she has this amazing caterer. And so he's like, let's just expand the options a little bit. And she's like, oh, we had our menu. And he's like, yeah, I'll pay for it. We're just going to like bring some more stuff. We're going to just like do even more.
Yes.
We're going to have personalized cocktails and like more. And also like it brings in a really fun and expansive vibe. Like, right, you can say, coming from that scarcity place, well, why would we need more? Like, we're good. We got our lighting and our music and our food and our wine, like we're good. But when you can actually feel into the difference between those two parties, that Jupiter party is pretty epic when he starts bringing in these different pieces, right? And like different lighting or different, just all these different pieces of, you know, I think a really beautiful question to ask when you're kind of in this space of, is this excess or is this, you know, something that I would really love, is to ask yourself, would I love this? And if you would, then it's worth it. If you wouldn't, and you're like, no, that's just like, I don't know, that doesn't do anything for me, then perfect. And then that's excess and you don't need that. But I think that's a really beautiful, to kind of bring you in alignment with that Jupiter energy is, would I love this? And if the answer is yes, then there you go, right?
Fabulous. So expansion, Jupiter is our expansion, because more just seems like beneath him. So we're going to go with expansion.
Expansion. Yeah. Yep. Just turning up the volume on all the goodness. Yeah. Which brings us to Saturn, who's a completely different energy.
It's a 180.
180 to Saturn. So Saturn is next, and Saturn takes about 29 to 30 years to make a full cycle around the zodiac. So probably one of the, I don't know, what's the word for, I don't want to say like well-known, but it's one of the bigger transits we go through.
Yeah.
As a Saturn return is when Saturn comes back to the space you were, space that he was when you were born. So it takes about 29 to 30 years. Some people will go through it as early as 28. Generally happens around that 30 age though. And he spends about 2.5 years in a sign. So when he's in a sign, he really kind of like, he's like, all right, we're going to do some work here. He's also associated with the energy of the builder, the carpenter. He is also the wise sage, like he's the father energy, or he can be of this. He can feel sometimes constricting, and like there's like this strictness to him, but it's really because he wants us to build a foundation that is real and that allows us to have the things that we really want. And so it can feel constricting, but when you can zoom out, it's actually very helpful and necessary to have that energy. So around 30 is when you go through a Saturn return, and you can kind of feel into for yourself, whether you're around that age or approaching that age, or if you've had a Saturn return. You also will go through a second Saturn return around 59, 60. So you can feel like, especially that first Saturn return, we'll just stick with that first one around 30. It's a transition time when you're really moving into more of who you are. Really, what do you want on a bigger level? And depending again on where you are, it can feel like the rug is being ripped out from under you if you're not quite on the right track. If you're in a job that is just not serving you, is not allowing you to expand into your allness. If you are in a relationship that may be great, but isn't quite that full what is possible in relationship, it can feel often like the rug is being pulled out from under you. That can be one version of Saturn return. Another version of Saturn return is if you are on that path and you are on the you are at least aware of where you want to go and kind of into those higher parts of yourself. It can be really beautiful as well. Like beautiful things can come into your life in a very real, tangible way. Also, some people sometimes get married around this time or whatever it is. There can be real tangible things that come into your life and that really change the trajectory of where you're going. And depending on where you are, it could be good or bad. And there's no really good or bad. It just can be, it can feel a little jolting, or it can feel like, oh, this is great. And this is helping me really bring things into being. And I think that, is Saturn in a nutshell, of depending on where you are and what your relationship is to being able to really be true with yourself and have this because he kind of can be this truth bomb of like, yeah, no, what you're doing is not actually right. It's not making you happy. Like you don't even enjoy it. That's kind of the energy that he can bring in. And so depending on where you are, if you're like dug in and you're like, no, like I'm just gonna, do this thing because I've always done this thing, it's gonna feel really painful. But if you're in the place of like, okay, like what's up? Like, let's see where this takes me. Then he can bring you into a place that is actually more aligned. It's not always easy, but it brings you into the place that it's like, oh, this feels way, way better. So yeah, that's Saturn.
I just wanted to run on the thread that you said real a number of times, that Saturn is what is real. And so there's this reality to Saturn, kind of that cold, hard facts, Saturn, that truth bombing. And I also want to touch into, so we have our first Saturn return at 30, but we have a Saturn opposition in our mid 40s, which culturally we call the midlife crisis. And what an opposition is transiting Saturn is opposite natal Saturn. And so there can be this push-pull that's happening that's asking us to reevaluate, because Saturn is about mastery. He's a professor. He is the wise old man. He's Gandalf, who's going to ask you questions rather than give you answers. So we go through this push-pull about midlife where we really get the opportunity to be like, okay, I set myself on this path when I was 30 or my early 30s. Is this still the path I want? We watch people blow up their lives in their early mid 40s all the time. They make movies about this stuff. They manufacture cars specifically for this time of life for some human beings. And then when we hit 60, 58 to 60, we go through our second Saturn return, which is this almost, so if 30 is stepping into our mastery, 60 is sitting back in our mastery. Like, I have done the work. I've spent 30 years honing. I went through a midlife crisis. I went through an opposition where I was asked to really look. And you often see people making changes to how they do business or how they show up in relationship during this time, if they're moving through it with a consciousness. So there is that reality to Saturn. I think that's a really excellent word, asking us, how are we showing up here in our lives? Are we moving towards the type of mastery where we get to just sit back and be the wise old sage that responds with questions rather than answers? that is, because that wise old sage, Gandalf is my favoriteest example. He asks questions to invite people into the reality that we are all capable of holding wisdom, and we are all capable of holding truth. So I just, as the older member of our podcast here, I'm going to talk to that midlife to 60s, and then there'll be another Saturn opposition at 75. How are you conducting yourself as you sit back in the mastery? Have you closed yourself off, or are you still open and willing to learn and shift and take in more? Because of course, reality, to an extent, because reality is life, is always shifting. It's changing, it's growing. This is where we move back into those personal planets where Mars is igniting things to grow as an agrarian lord, and Mercury is bringing in new information and new technology, and Venus is reassessing, does this caterer still serve me? Or have my tastes changed? Have my tastes evolved into something different? Is it okay for me to, do the same party menu I've been doing for the past 10 years? Well, actually, I've refined myself. I have honed down what I am. So that's my Saturn piece for all of us old people. Cheers.
Yeah, I love the word mastery too. I think that's a really perfect word for Saturn. And when you feel into, he spends about 2.5 years in a sign. He really gets to create mastery in that area. Right. Which again, when we get to the houses, that will make more sense. But he really gets to spend some time creating that mastery. And right. And sometimes in the beginning, it feels a little tough because we're just learning. And then we're kind of moving into a place where, okay, yeah, like I can see this. And then we move into that, being able to really fully embrace it to that mastery point. And so the other piece with that first Saturn return, the reason why that first Saturn return is a big one around 30 is because we come into the fullness of our astrology chart at that age. So in the world of astrology, that's kind of like you come into adulthood because you have experienced all the archetypes of the zodiac. You kind of come into this more real version of you, or more true version of you, or however, however you want to frame that. And that really is when there's this like, okay, and now you're off, right? And you can feel into, in at least here, 18 is considered an adult. So in some versions you can consider, okay, like 18. In astrology, it's 30, right? So you don't come into the fullness of you don't come, which I think, talking to a lot of people, having experienced that myself, like it makes sense seeing people go through their Saturn returns. It really makes sense of you come into the fullness of your astrology chart at 30. And so that's a reason why that first one is so big, because it's really like this coming into adulthood in the lens of astrology. So yeah, that makes sense. And I think with the party energy of Saturn, which we've touched on, he has this like professor vibe. I can like picture him with this like salt and pepper hair. He's got glasses. He got a very like nice, fashionable suit. And yeah, he's very interesting to talk to, like interesting and wise, right? And again, like you said, when you go to him though, and you're having these conversations, he's going to ask questions that bring out more about you. And yeah, he definitely has this energy of like, definitely like chill and laid back. But once you get him going, especially on things that he's passionate about, like very wise, very smart. And I think just in general, like you get a good feeling talking to him. Like to me, like I would want to spend time talking to Saturn at a party and just like, right, picking his brain about all the things he knows, seeing what kind of questions he asks me. Yeah, I think it's a chance to like, right, spend some time with that Gandalf energy.
Yeah, that's absolutely nailed it.
Love it. Any last pieces on Saturn before we move to Uranus?
No, I think we've got it. He's our mastery.
He is our mastery. Yeah, I love that. So brings us to Uranus, which takes Uranus 84 years to make a complete cycle. And so if we're lucky, we'll have one Uranus return in our life. He spends about 7 years per sign. So he spends quite a bit of time in the sign that he's in, bringing change. He's a big change maker. He's the rebel. He's the revolutionary. And he spins on his side. He's the only planet that does completely his own thing by spinning on his side. And so we go through one, maybe one, if we make it to 84, one Uranus return. But you spoke into the Saturn transit, that opposition that happens in the 40s. Well, there's 3 big transits that happen in your 40s. That is a piece of it, but the 3 big ones are a Uranus opposition. So we'll go into that because if you think about it, it takes him 84 years to make a complete cycle. Well, another big one is when he is in the opposite point in your chart. So natally, right, where Uranus was when you were born, takes 84 years for it to come back around. But in your 40s, you're going to hit a point where he's opposite to your natal Uranus. And we'll talk about the other ones because the other 2 are a Neptune square and a Pluto square. But the Uranus opposition is one that really shakes things up. And that's why these 3 transits are kind of known as those like around that midlife crisis time. But the Uranus one is one that really changes everything, changes the way that you think about things, changes the way you view about yourself, changes things. He's a change maker.
All the things,
right?
all the things. It changes all the things.
And you can also feel into when he's transiting certain areas of your chart. And again, we'll get into this when we do our house podcast on the houses, but depending on what area he is in your chart based on your house that he's in, because each house basically represents an area of your life. He can change that area very drastically, and it takes 7 years. So this is a very, it's a longer kind of change, right? It's not we're like changing our hair kind of change. It's like changing who we are, or changing who we think we are, or right, whatever. So yeah, that's Uranus. He definitely brings just a different view on things, different perspective that up until then hadn't even thought about. But here you are, changing things up.
Here you are. So this rebel energy is kind of rolling into our party here. And it's a great Uranus opposition, having just survived mine. Woo! Is a great time to really reevaluate kind of everything. Am I happy? What's working? What's not working? How do I change it? And, we also, because Uranus is a slow mover, all of our transits with him are one-hit wonders. from the standpoint of he also conjuncts our ascendant, and anything else he visits, he's only going to do that transit one time. So there is a kind of a lightning, an electric feel to Uranus with how he moves. Uranus right now in the sky is in Taurus, and we're watching all kinds of big, massive earth events happening as he brings this change to us on a really on the earth level. So he's this rebel energy rolling into the party, and ready to shake it up. You know, he sees what's going on, and he wants to know what can be changed to make this better, and how he can push the edges, and how he can bring in and invite some growth. And the fact that there may be old things about the party that need to go. So he's rolling in on his side, bringing in some, let's bring some new thought to this. Let's bring some new conversation. Saturn and Uranus having a discussion sounds like a really interesting opportunity to sit back and watch this mastery come up against revolution. Because for me, mastery is the ability to be flexible, to not hold too tightly, and to welcome revolution. So I see the two of these energies in their highest, really bringing a lot of beauty and a lot of fun and a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I see him rolling into the party with like this like metallic, shiny suit that like no one else has ever seen before, like very unique kind of quality. And yeah, he's gonna shake things up. Like he's gonna totally turn everything on its head. And yeah, I think he's gonna want to switch up the lighting. I think he's gonna want to like totally change the music to like whatever it's been. He's gonna be like, let's put on some techno, like whatever games you were playing, like, yep, no, we're gonna like totally switch it up. Like he comes in and the party just turns, like completely shifts it. So yeah, that's Uranus. And I think depending on what areas in his chart or what area in your chart he's hitting, it's helpful to know, because he's going to revolutionize whatever area he touches. And so because it's a longer transit of 7 years, it can be really helpful. So definitely when we put out our house podcast, listen to the houses, you can feel into, but if you're familiar with your chart now too, you can just look at what house Uranus is in and what that represents. And that can be really helpful, because he definitely, I also have felt with people who are going through their Uranus opposition, can be super, super challenging one, because it pushes everything that we think we know. And so, yeah, it's definitely that change maker energy. There was another thought I had and it kind of flew.
We can always come back to it.
We can, but yeah, I think that's just the main thing, is just to look at where he's at in your chart, and it can be helpful. I guess that's the other point with the Uranus opposition, that one that you go through in your 40s, that it can be helpful just to know you're in it, because you don't feel crazy. You don't feel like everything is like, right. And I'm sure you can speak to this.
Yes, it is. Knowing what you're in is so helpful, because it opens up your energy field, your mind, your awareness to being like, oh, this is pushing at me this way. Do I want to push back, or do I want to allow this to invite and create some change? We really needed a bio break, so I apologize for the awkward pause, but we're back with Neptune.
We're back with Neptune. Yes. So Neptune, unfortunately, we will never experience a Neptune return in our lifetime. He takes 165 years to make a full cycle around the zodiac. But we do experience, and we'll go into that in a minute, the Neptune square that we talked about that happens in our 40s. But he spends a little less than 14 years in a sign. So a long time. He's an outer planet, definitely slow mover, right? You can feel 165 years, like we won't experience a Neptune return in our life. So yeah, that transit that happens when we're in our 40s is Neptune has this quality of putting a veil over things, right? He has many qualities, which we'll go into all of them, but one of them is he can create this fogginess. He is definitely a high spiritual kind of energy, has this energy of the shaman, like being able to traverse between our world and other world. And that transit that can happen in our 40s is, there can sometimes be confusion, a little bit of fogginess, a little bit of like, I don't know, confusion, right? That can be part of it. Another part of it can be, again, I think this is why it's helpful to know what we're in, but another part of it can be stepping into a deeper spiritual path, whatever that is, a deeper, just a lot more aligned path, or however you want to view it. But he definitely does have that just connection to our higher self kind of energy. So yeah, that one, when you throw that into that, we've talked about the Uranus opposition that brings change, you can kind of bring in this confusion and fogginess, and you can see why that can be a little bit of a challenge. Also, these, depending, and it's, I always find it really interesting, some people have these all close together, like literally they can be in all three at once. Uranus opposition, Neptune square, Pluto square. Sometimes they're spaced out, sometimes you get a little break in between, they can go in different order. So yeah, but you can feel into bringing that quality in, that fogginess, that veil that Neptune creates.
Mhm.
And what it's really urging us to do is to lean into trust, to lean into that ability to trust in the unknown, to take those steps, even though we can't see with clarity, we can't see it like so tangibly, but there's a part of us that knows that this is the way to go. And so that can really be challenged around that time when we go through that Neptune square. Also, squares can be, right, a bit of a challenge. So it's creating this confusion, it's creating this veil so that we can step into a deeper level of trust. Right. And you can feel how for some people that can go a little wily, why sometimes there can be that we're going to go off and we're just going to, buy the new sports car or whatever it is, because there's this just like confusion of who am I? Right. And so that can be part of what Neptune brings in. But definitely, I think in general, he's always urging us to lean into deeper trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think trust is an excellent Neptune word. Neptune in his shadow is our addictions, and our addictions often move us away from trust. And whether it's a substance addiction, well, when I say substance, I mean alcohol or drug substance, or whether it's a shopping addiction or a gambling addiction, we're moving away from our inner knowing with those things. And there's a fog that gets created because we're not trusting and we're not leaning in. And so often our addictions are responses to pushing back against the things that we know most. What are you smiling about?
I'm just laughing. As you said fog, I like imagined a fog machine to the party.
So yes, Neptune's bringing the fog machine. He's bringing the ice, the dry ice, to create an atmosphere, because there is an atmospheric quality to Neptune.
Yeah, that's what I was laughing about. Yeah, and as everyone's moving through, as when he puts that fog machine in there, it's totally different. And now people are like, oh, I don't really know. Who is that? Who am I touching? Oh, hey, Venus. Like,
yeah. there needs to be this trust that everybody at this party is trustworthy and that you know them well, which is, I think, one of the reasons astrology is such a powerful tool, is as we get to know how each of these energies shows up in us, we start to trust our own mastery. We start to trust our ability to ignite things. We start to trust our ability to create revolution and to be receptive to our own magnetism. Like there's this thing that Neptune brings with the fog that really leans into that trust. And the more we get to know our astrology placements and how those archetypal threads, which all of us carry, we all carry all 12 signs of the zodiac, we carry all of the planets, like we carry all of it. It shows up, we deepen our trust with ourselves. And we recognize it's okay to be in the fog, which is one of the things I love about the Neptune square is, humans can't see around a 90-degree angle on our own. So we need to trust what's around that corner, be it an obstacle or an opportunity, which are really the same things. It's about how we meet it. So yeah, trust in our friend Neptune and his fog machine at the party.
I love it. Yeah, he brings a quality of mystery. And I think he brings a quality in that when you can really lean into that, it's awe-inspiring and it's amazing. And I think sometimes we get so in our like human, I want to know, I want to see. But when you can really lean into the mystery and like, that's actually really fun and beautiful in itself. And it does take a little bit of trust and it takes a little bit of like letting go. But ultimately, like without the mystery, life wouldn't be as fun.
Why show up?
Right? Why come to play the game? Like if you knew all the stuff, like that's not that much fun. Right? If like you knew the end of the
ass on the way out.
Right. So I think that mystery quality is really important that he brings, that can sometimes feel frustrating to us, that can sometimes feel like, I just want to know, I just want to have the answer. But when you can really lean into it, it's like, no, I actually wouldn't. Like, I actually like have had a lot of fun when I can lean into the mystery and know that it's going to be there anyway. Yeah. So me fighting against it is just going to create more fog, more illusion, more confusion. So yeah, kind of leaning into the mystery, I think is definitely Neptune's, MO.
Perfect. Which, now that the fog machine has arrived at the party and everybody's confused, Pluto is now going to show up at the party.
My favorite, Pluto. Yes. And like how perfect Pluto would roll in when everything was foggy and like you can't really see.
You can't see anything.
Yeah. I love it. So Pluto takes 248 years to make a complete cycle around the zodiac. So even longer than Neptune. He spends anywhere from 12 to 31 years in a sign. Mm-hmm. And again, we talked about those transits in our 40s. So Pluto square is another piece of that. And Pluto brings transformation, evolution, and like he's the big picture, right? He's the furthest planet out. So he can see everything that's going on. He can see all of it. And so that adding that Pluto square into those 3 transits can definitely can feel tough, can feel like it's really bringing everything to the surface. I like to use the word like excavate with Pluto. He really just like brings it all up. He's god of the underworld. So there can be this quality of like bringing all of these hidden bits, all of these repressed bits, right? All of this darkness up because it's actually part of us. And it is just part of us that wants to be expressed. And so Pluto can really bring that up. And so, right, so you feel into those 3. Now we've covered all 3, the Uranus opposition, the Neptune square, and the Pluto square. And like you can see why that time, like why midlife crisis has been a term that's associated with that time, right? Because it can be very confronting. I think that's another Pluto word, right? Confronting.
Yes.
But I love Pluto because without Pluto, there's no depth. He brings a depth to things. He's definitely not surface level. He rules the sign Scorpio. So if you are familiar with Scorpio, or you want to take a listen back to our podcast where we talked about Scorpio, Scorpio is this depth. It's this real, like, deep, emotional, deep, like, mystery energy. So he rules that. He's god of the underworld, right?
Yeah, I'm enjoying the picture of Pluto rolling up to the party when the fog machine's in full go. Everything's been rearranged since Uranus showed up. Like, everything got shifted, and then the fog machine shows up, and then Pluto rolls in.
Yeah.
And he's bringing all of his, like, well, here I am. Let's go deep. Let's excavate the stuff. Let's dig this all up. It doesn't matter that everything has changed in the past 15 minutes.
Right. And he wouldn't have wanted to be at the party until everyone had arrived, because he's like, well, now this is the full, this is the full party vibe, right? This is like, everyone's here, everyone's brought their stuff, and this is when I show up, right? I'm not going to show up when it's like, right, when it's just Mercury zipping around.
Yeah.
I'm going to show up when everyone's here, and it's the full spectrum, right, of everything that we get to bring.
Because the full spectrum is so much more interesting to Pluto, because he wants to see how the pieces fit together, and he wants to encourage each member of the party, like, well, what more is there, more that you can bring to this? Are you willing to engage with us on a deeper level? He wants to bring those things in and gather them up and engage in a way that creates a change. As the god of the underworld, he's responsible for the dead. Once you bring in his partner and Persephone as a sovereign, you have a sacred union team that does both birth and death. Like, that transformative moment of, for me, my view is, as if we're doing this right, we go through births and deaths in this body, transforming things, moving things. It's that Scorpio piece of Phoenix consciousness. The Phoenix has no idea that when it immolates itself, that it will be reborn. But what it does know is it can't continue to function the way it's functioning, that it has to move into this next stage. And that level of release can be so scary to our little human selves. Our little monkey minds are just jabbering away, being like, well, we can't do that. But Pluto's like, oh, no, there's more. If we do this, if we can move into this idea of big release, and that, yeah, it's very confronting.
Yeah. And another piece that comes up with Pluto is it's non-judgmental. We are human, can have judgments on the different parts of us or the different things happening at the party, but Pluto is not. Pluto is in full acceptance of all of us and actually wants all of us, right? Even the taboo things, like, he's gonna be like bringing up the taboo things in conversation. Like, he's going to really be bringing all of it up, because that is, from Pluto's perspective, that is the full expression of who we are. We're like, right, we can kind of put things down and say, okay, well, no, we don't talk about that, or these are things that we don't do, or, right, there's these kind of rules that we collectively set. Pluto is like, no, actually, I'm going to bring those things up, because that completes the picture, right? That completes the fullness. So that's another piece that he brings no judgment. So I think when you can really lean into, that's why I feel like he's such a beautiful energy, and he can come off as very harsh and very confronting. But ultimately he comes with no judgment. He comes because you're the only one who's bringing the judgment to those parts. He is not. And so that's a piece too, that I feel like that judgment piece is really beautiful, when you can lean into that, when you can lean into that he actually wants all of you without judgment, that's actually very freeing. But we have to work through the pieces to get there, because and there always are pieces, because there's always pieces blocking the fullness of us. They're just so that we can see them. And that's really what Pluto is, he just wants us to see. That's all.
It's one of the most beautiful things about working in any of the pantheons that are polytheistic, is that those polytheistic energies, those archetypes, those deities all have all of these human qualities, because it's our humanity that is so, so, so important. And our ability to be fully human while we're working towards what we're capable of. And Pluto is that invitation to be fully human and to bring all of your pieces. When we're working within a system that says, well, here is the divine and it's perfect, you're never going to get there. When you're working in a system and an energy archetypal way that allows you in with your humanity, being welcomed, like this is that Pluto piece. Yes, bring me all of it. So everybody's at the party.
Everybody's at the party. Yeah.
Everybody made it.
Now, when we talk about the planets, you can feel into these different personas. And yeah, I find it's just super helpful to kind of bring in all of these pieces. And you can look at in your chart where these planets fall for you natally. And then you can go listen to our Zodiac podcast and kind of put them in their different elements, put them in the different themes that come up for each planet. So yeah, I love it.
And if you want a chart reading, contact me. I do them. I will help you. We will figure it out. So thanks for joining us for another episode of Rooted Cosmic Wisdom. If you want to go deeper, like Alexis spoke about, we talked about Venus and the Myth of Inanna in our Patreon podcast. So that'll be below in the show notes. Join us there. Have a great day.